Today I'm going to show you how to make your very own dice mold. Before we get started, here is everything you're going to need. Most of these can be found in my shop, which I will link below. Before working with resin, make sure you have proper PPE. That includes a respirator and nitrile gloves, as well as proper ventilation. Here are some dice that I made with my own dice molds. First, we're going to lay down a piece of transfer tape. It comes in these big old rolls, and I just cut out a square that my mold housing will fit on. Then I grab my mold housing. I designed these ones myself. You can get them in my shop if you need some, but you can also use PVC pipe or any other sort of housing. These ones come with built-in keys, which is really easy. It makes everything much quicker, so I like using these. If you don't know what keys are, it helps keep the lid aligned with the base of the mold so it doesn't slip around. I set the housing on a flat surface so that it's nice and flush, and then I put these little clamps on either side. These are 1-inch clamps, but you can also use bigger ones if you have them. Then I carefully line up the mold housing with the transfer tape and press it on there really well. And then I flip it over and I press on it with my finger a little bit just to make sure it's nice and stuck on there. Then for this next part, you can do it one of two ways. I use this key that I made, but you can also use smaller individual keys. I just find using one big key is a little bit easier and it takes less time. These also help with aligning the lid and the base. What I do is lay down this key first inside the mold housing and stick it really well to the transfer tape. Then I will take this cuticle trimmer and I use the soft rubber side to press it down onto the key. This just makes sure it's really stuck to that transfer tape and won't lift up when you're pouring your silicone. Next is to take your polished dice masters and stick them to the transfer tape. Remember that the more flawless your masters are, the better your dice will turn out and the less work you'll have to do each time. If you need some masters, I also offer those in the shop. I place 2 dice on each side of the key and then 1 in the center. I like to place the D6 in the center because that's where the most problems seem to happen, and the D6 is the easiest to repair. Again, make sure you're pressing them down really well so that the silicone doesn't go underneath of them. Once that's done, it's time to pour some silicone. Every silicone is different, but for this one, I do equal parts A and B and mix them for about 3 minutes. I don't recommend this silicone for beginners because it sets really fast, but I will have some other recommended ones in the description. Once that's nice and mixed, it's time to pour your silicone. Make sure you're pouring in an even stream in the same spot. This lets the silicone flow naturally over the masters and traps less air bubbles. If you're going to be curing your dice in a pressure pot, you also want to be curing your mold in a pressure pot. So that's the next step, is to put this first half of the mold in the pressure pot. If you want more information about pressure pots, let me know and I can make a video on that. Once that silicone is cured, you can take your mold out of the pressure pot, take those clamps off, then flip the mold over and remove that transfer tape. Then I remove the mold housing and take that key out of the mold. This next step is optional, but I just use that cuticle trimmer again and I trim off the edges of the silicone. It just makes it look nice and neat. Once that's done, we can prep the mold for pouring our lid. This is the most important step because silicone likes to stick to silicone. If you pour that lid without a barrier, it will stick together and your whole mold will be ruined. I personally use baby powder with talc as my barrier, but you can also use Vaseline or mold release. For baby powder, I just sprinkle it on and then rub it around with my glove. If you're using Vaseline, you can just take a small brush and brush it around the mold, making sure not to get it on the dice faces. Once I get that powder on, I just take a small brush and get it into where the key indent is. Then I take a little extra and brush it onto the keys on the side. Anywhere where that new silicone is going, you want to make sure to have that barrier. Then I take a little compressed air to blow off the excess, and then wipe off those faces with a microfiber cloth. Now you have nice and shiny faces and you're ready to pour your lid. I flip my mold housing over and put it back on, and then use those same clamps to hold it together. Then we mix and pour our new batch of silicone, and that creates our lid. Again, make sure you're pouring in a nice steady stream and letting that silicone flow over the base. I pop that back in the pressure pot and let it fully cure. Once it's cured, I take it out, remove the clamps, and take off that mold housing. Then I do a little more trimming with that cuticle trimmer. Again, this is optional, it's just for aesthetics really. I sell these molds, so I just like to make sure they're nice and clean looking. Plus it's also kind of satisfying to do, and to watch honestly. Now it's time to pull apart the lid from the base. This can get a little bit tricky. I have longer nails, so that usually helps me out, but you might need to use a tool to help you do this. You just start by slowly lifting up those keys. Once you get under it, it's pretty easy to lift it up. Just make sure you are gentle and don't rip it off. If you do happen to accidentally rip one off, it's not the end of the world, it'll still work. They're just there to give you a little extra security. Once you have 3 of those lifted up, you can start pulling the lid off, nice and gentle. Make sure you don't do it too fast or you risk tearing the edges of those dice. And then once it's off, you can remove that last key. The final step is to remove your masters from the mold. You want to be very gentle doing this because if you scratch your mold, then all of your dice will also have that scratch. My best tip here is to really pull apart that mold from the masters so that none of the corners will scrape, and then you can lift the dice out. Do this slowly one by one until all your masters are out, and make sure you store them in a safe place where they won't get scratched. Now you can admire all your hard work and you can see how shiny your mold is. Make sure to pop that lid back on so your mold stays nice and shiny and dust free. If you do need any of the supplies I showed today, I do have them linked down below. And if you don't want to make a mold yourself, I also offer those there, as well as masters, and of course my own dice that I make. If you enjoyed this video, please do all the good stuff, like, subscribe, leave a comment, let me know if there are any more tutorials you want to see. I'd love to do an actual dice pouring video, I know people really like those. Have fun crafting and be safe.